Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. Tonight, we drift into one of the oldest and most intimate mysteries of human experience, a country we visit nearly every night, yet rarely understand, a place we step into without packing, without planning, and almost without noticing, the strange and tender country of dreams. There is something quietly remarkable about dreams. They belong to everyone. They are not the property of scholars, nor the privilege of any one culture, nor the inheritance of any single age. The farmer who falls asleep at the edge of a field, the child curled beneath a thin blanket, the traveler resting in an unfamiliar room, the elder dozing in an afternoon chair. All of them, sooner or later, slip into worlds that no one else can see. And in the morning, they wake again into the shared daylight, often carrying only a soft fragment of where they have been. Tonight, we will not try to solve dreams. We will not approach them as a problem to be answered. Instead, we will follow the long, gentle path of how people across centuries have tried to understand them. We will visit ancient temples where dreamers once slept beside the sick, hoping for guidance. We will pause beside philosophers who first asked, with care, whether dreams might come from the body itself rather than from the gods. We will sit briefly with the early psychologists who imagined the dreaming mind as a hidden landscape, full of meaning. And we will look in on the quiet laboratories of the 20th century, where researchers first watched a sleeper's eyes move beneath closed lids and realized something extraordinary was happening within. Along the way, we will listen to what science has come to know, and we will be honest about what it still does not. The dreaming brain has been studied for decades now, with instruments far more delicate than anything our ancestors imagined. And yet, much remains uncertain. Why we dream at all is still, in some ways, an open question. The mystery has not been removed. It has only been deepened. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you can follow SleepWise and share it with someone who might enjoy falling asleep while learning something new. So let your shoulders soften and let your breathing find its slower pace. Let the day's last small thoughts drift toward the edges of the room. There is no need to remember every name, every century, or every theory. The story will move slowly, the way sleep itself moves, in soft and unhurried steps. Tonight, we are not chasing dreams. We are walking gently around the long human effort to understand them. And as we begin, the night itself becomes part of the story, because somewhere ahead of us, sleep is waiting, and beyond sleep, perhaps a quiet dream of your own. Before we step into temples and laboratories, it helps to pause for a moment on something simple, something we tend to overlook because it happens so quietly. Almost every human being who has ever lived has dreamed, not occasionally, not as a rare event, but night after night, generation after generation, across every continent and century. Think of how unusual that is. Languages have shifted, empires have risen and fallen, calendars have been rewritten, religions have argued with one another, Technologies have transformed daily life beyond recognition. And yet, through all of it, in every village and every city, in tents and palaces and modern apartments, sleeping minds have continued to spin their soft, unrepeatable worlds. The act of dreaming has outlived almost everything else. There is something tender in that continuity. A child today, asleep in a quiet bedroom, may dream of a winding staircase or a kind animal or a place that does not exist. 3,000 years ago, a child in a stone house in another part of the world likely dreamed of something equally strange and equally vivid. We will never know what those long-ago dreams contained, but we know, almost certainly, that they happened. Modern researchers believe that nearly all healthy adults dream multiple times each night, even when they remember nothing in the morning. Most dreams are forgotten within minutes of waking, a quiet fact that has frustrated dreamers for centuries. Some people are confident they never dream at all, yet sleep studies repeatedly show otherwise. The forgetting seems to be part of the design, not a personal failing. Dreams also seem to begin early in life. Infants spend a remarkable amount of their sleep in the active stage marked by quick eye movement, the period most associated with vivid dreaming in adults. What an infant experiences during that time is, of course, beyond our reach. We cannot interview a sleeping baby, but the patterns of brain activity suggest that something resembling inner experience may be unfolding, and dreaming may not be only human. Cats twitch in their sleep. Dogs paddle their paws as if running. Birds, rats, even some reptiles show patterns during rest that resemble the dreaming states of mammals. We will return to this gentle thought later. For now, it is enough to notice that dreaming, whatever it is, may be far older than our species and far more widely shared than our written histories alone would suggest. So tonight, as you settle into the warmth of your blankets, you join a quiet line that stretches back through every grandparent, every ancestor, every sleeper of every age. You are part of an unbroken thread of dreaming that began long before history was written, long before the first stories were carved into stone, and continues softly and without instruction into this very night. The earliest written records of dreams come to us from the soft clay of Mesopotamia, long before paper, before parchment, before the alphabets we know today. People pressed wedge-shaped marks into damp tablets and let the sun bake them into permanence. Among the many things they recorded, alongside harvests, laws, and prayers, were dreams. In the ancient cities between the Tigris and the Euphrates, dreams were not considered private noise. They were taken seriously, sometimes anxiously, as messages worth examining. Scribes compiled long lists of dream images and what each might foretell. To dream of a certain animal, a certain river, a certain action in the night, was to receive a kind of clue about the days ahead. These were not casual curiosities. They were treated as a quiet correspondence between the sleeping mind and the wider order of things. The most famous of these collections is sometimes called Syrian Dream Book, preserved in fragments from the great library of King Ashurbanipal in the 7th century, before our era. That library, buried for thousands of years beneath the ruins of Nineveh, held tens of thousands of tablets when archaeologists eventually uncovered it. Among them were these careful dream catalogs, evidence that even at the dawn of writing, human beings were already trying to organize the wandering material of the night. The famous Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories in human literature, also returns again and again to dreams. The hero dreams, his companion dreams, and the dreams shape what they do next. To early storytellers, a dream was not a side note. It was a turning point. Far to the south, along the Nile, the Egyptians developed their own careful traditions. A papyrus from the era of Rameses II, now known as the Chester Beatty Papyrus, preserves a long Egyptian dream interpretation guide. Each entry follows a quiet pattern. If a man sees himself doing this, the meaning is good. If he sees himself doing that, the meaning is troubling. Dreams were sorted, weighed, and held against expectation. Later still, in the Ptolemaic period, an Egyptian temple dreamer named Hor of Sebennytos kept his own personal records, writing down the dreams he received while sleeping within sacred precincts. His archive, recovered in modern times, gives us a rare and intimate glimpse of one ancient person's nightly inner life. What unites these scattered records is something quietly moving. From the very beginning of writing, human beings did not want to lose their dreams. They wanted to keep them, study them, share them. They wanted to set the night down beside the day, where it could be considered with the same patience as a harvest report or a king's edict. Even before science, even before philosophy in the formal sense, the dream was already considered worth remembering, worth recording, and worth passing on to readers of a future no one yet knew. From the river valleys of the ancient world, the story of dreams flows next into the soft hills and white-stone sanctuaries of Greece. Here, dreams entered not only literature and philosophy, but also medicine, in a way that may sound unusual to modern ears. The Greeks honored a god named Asclepius, who was associated with healing. Across the Greek world, sanctuaries were built in his name, set apart from ordinary towns, often nestled in places where the air was clean and the views were quiet. The most famous of these stood at Epidaurus, in the eastern part of the Peloponnese, but others rose at Kos, Pergamum, and many other locations across the Greek and later Roman world. People came to these sanctuaries when they were ill. They came with chronic pain, with troubled hearts, with conditions their local healers could not soothe. After a series of cleansing rituals, prayers, and offerings, the patient would be invited to sleep within the sacred grounds in a covered hall built for that purpose. This practice was called dream incubation. The hope was that during the night, the god himself, or one of his sacred animals, often imagined as a gentle snake, might appear in the dream and offer a sign of healing. When morning came, the dreamer would describe the night to a temple priest who helped interpret what had been seen. Sometimes the dream offered a direct instruction. Bathe in this stream, eat this herb, avoid this kind of food. Sometimes the dream itself was considered the cure. The walls of these sanctuaries, especially at Epidaurus, were once lined with stone tablets recording the recoveries that grateful visitors attributed to their nights of sacred sleep. Centuries later, in the 2nd century of the Common Era, a man named Artemidorus of Daldis traveled widely across the Mediterranean world listening to dreams. He gathered them from sailors and farmers, merchants and physicians, ordinary people in marketplaces and inns. He then wrote a 5-book work known as the Oneirocritica, which can be translated as the interpretation of dreams. Artemidorus believed that dreams could carry meaning, but he was careful and methodical about it. He insisted that one had to know the dreamer in order to interpret a dream. The same image, he said, would mean different things depending on the person's age, profession, health, and circumstances. A dream of climbing a tree might mean one thing for a young athlete and quite another for an aging merchant. A dream of water near a sailor was not the same as a dream of water near a farmer who had never seen the open sea. That insistence on context, on the individual life that surrounded the dream, would echo across centuries, long after the temples of Asclepius had fallen quiet and the priests who once received the dreamers had vanished into history. The idea that a dream might be deeply personal, woven from the texture of a single life, would return again. While temples and travelers continued to take dreams as messages from gods, a quieter turn was already underway elsewhere in the Greek world. The philosopher Aristotle, writing in the 4th century before our era, approached the subject in a way that would feel surprisingly familiar to a modern reader. Aristotle was a careful observer. He studied animals, plants, weather, and the movements of the stars with the patience of a man who believed nature could be understood if one was willing to look closely enough. When he turned his attention to sleep and dreams, he applied that same gentle method. He wrote 3 short treatises that have survived to us, often known by their Latin titles. One concerned sleep and waking. One concerned dreams themselves. And one concerned the question of whether dreams could foretell the future. In these works, Aristotle proposed something quietly revolutionary. He suggested that dreams might not be visitations from the gods at all, but a natural product of the body and mind. During the day, he reasoned, the senses are constantly active. The eyes gather light, the ears gather sound, the skin gathers touch. The mind moves through these impressions without rest. But at night, when the body lies still and the senses grow quiet, those impressions do not vanish. They linger, like the soft after-image left when a candle is moved across the dark. For Aristotle, the dream was something like the play of these sensory residues, free of the day's interruptions. The mind, no longer fully steering, allowed images to drift, recombine, and form into the strange shapes we encounter while asleep. He noted that people who had eaten heavily, or who had a fever, or who were anxious, often had especially vivid or unsettled dreams. To him, this suggested that the body itself influenced the dreaming mind, much as wind shapes the surface of a still pond. He also wrote, with characteristic care, about the question of dream prophecy. He did not entirely dismiss it, but he was cautious. He thought that some dreams might appear to foretell events simply by coincidence. Others might pick up on faint signals the dreamer had noticed during the day without consciously registering them. Either way, he resisted the idea that dreams were sent from above for the sake of the sleeper. This was a remarkable shift in tone. Aristotle did not mock the older view, nor did he forbid it to others. He simply asked whether nature itself could account for what people experienced when they slept. In doing so, he placed a small but enduring stone on the path that would eventually lead, many centuries later, to laboratories, brain scans, and the modern study of sleep. The dream had begun very softly to come down from the heavens and settle within the human being. As the ancient world gave way to the medieval one, dreams entered the great religious traditions and took on a new gravity. They were no longer only material for philosophers or temple priests. They became part of scripture, theology, and the inner life of faith. In the Hebrew Bible, dreams appear at moments of decision. The patriarch Jacob dreams of a ladder rising into the heavens with messengers moving upon it. His son Joseph, sold into Egypt, becomes famous as an interpreter of dreams, eventually reading the dreams of Pharaoh and helping a kingdom prepare for famine. In the New Testament, another Joseph, the husband of Mary, receives guidance through dreams that shape the early life of the family at the heart of the Christian story. Across these passages, the dream is not a curiosity. It is a channel through which something important is delivered. Within early Christianity, however, the topic also became delicate. The North African thinker Augustine, writing at the end of the 4th century, devoted careful attention to the strangeness of dreams. He was troubled by the question of moral responsibility. If a person behaves in a dream in ways they would never choose while awake, can they be held accountable for that inner conduct? Augustine concluded with some relief that the dreaming self was not the same as the waking self, and that one should not be condemned for what one merely dreamed. Yet the question itself reveals how seriously dreams were taken at the time. The Christian world also inherited an older Roman tradition of classifying dreams. A late Roman writer named Macrobius, commenting on a famous text by Cicero, distinguished several kinds of dream. Some were thought to be meaningful, sent through divine or rational channels. Others were considered merely the noise of digestion and worry. That careful sorting was a quiet attempt to keep nuance alive within faith. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, dream interpretation flourished as a serious intellectual tradition. The 8th century scholar Muhammad ibn Sirin became renowned for his work in this area, and dream books in his name circulated across centuries and cultures. In many Islamic traditions, the truthful dream was held in high regard, though scholars also distinguished it carefully from confused or troubling dreams. And throughout medieval Europe, mystics and visionaries described inner experiences that often blurred the line between dream and waking vision. Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century wrote of luminous visions that arrived while she was awake, though her accounts share much of the texture of dreams. Across these centuries, the dream sat at the threshold between heaven and the human heart, treated with both reverence and caution. It could be a message, a warning, a comfort, or a confusion, and the careful work of telling them apart was considered a kind of inner labor. While European thought wrestled with dreams in its own way, other traditions, far older in some respects, had developed their own deep understandings. Tonight, we touch on a few of these gently, knowing that each one deserves more time than a single evening can offer. In Tibetan Buddhism, there exists a contemplative practice often called dream yoga. It belongs to a wider set of teachings, sometimes associated with the Indian master Naropa and his lineage. In dream yoga, the practitioner trains, gradually and with patience, to recognize the dream as a dream while still inside it. The aim is not entertainment, nor mere curiosity, but spiritual cultivation. By becoming aware within dreams, the practitioner is said to gain insight into the constructed nature of all experience. The dream becomes a kind of teacher, a soft school in which the boundary between appearance and reality can be examined. This idea would later resonate with Western researchers studying what they would come to call lucid dreaming. But long before the laboratories arrived, contemplatives in Tibetan monasteries had been working quietly with the same inner territory for many centuries. Far away on the continent of Australia, Aboriginal peoples developed something altogether different and deeply sacred. The English word dream time, sometimes also translated as the dreaming, attempts to point toward a complex set of ideas that varies among Aboriginal nations and languages. It is not simply the realm of nightly dreams. It refers more profoundly to an ancestral time and presence in which great beings shaped the land, the laws, and the rhythms of life, and which remains in some sense ever present beneath the surface of the world. Dreams in this tradition can be one way among many of touching that ancestral reality, but the dreaming itself is far larger than any single dream. We approach this idea with respect, knowing it belongs first to the peoples who have carried it for thousands of generations. In ancient China, dreams entered philosophy through one of the most beloved short passages in the world's literature. The Taoist thinker Zhuangzi, writing in the 4th century before our era, described falling asleep and dreaming he was a butterfly, fluttering happily through the air. When he awoke, he wondered, was he a man who had dreamed of being a butterfly, Or was he now a butterfly dreaming of being a man? He did not solve the puzzle. He simply offered it. Across these traditions, the dream is taken seriously, but not always in the same way. In some, it is a path of contemplative practice. In others, a doorway to ancestors and to the sacred shape of the land. In others still, a quiet riddle about identity itself, asked without insisting on an answer. Together, they remind us that no single culture has owned the dream, and that the night has been read in many different lights. As Europe entered the Age of Reason, dreams encountered a new kind of skepticism. The thinkers of the 17th and 18th centuries were drawn to clarity, evidence, and orderly thought. Many of them grew cautious about treating the wandering night as a source of truth. The French philosopher René Descartes raised a piercing question in his Meditations of 1641. How, he asked, could anyone be certain they were awake at this very moment? Dreams sometimes feel entirely real while they are unfolding. Only on waking does their dream nature become clear. He used this thought to test the foundations of knowledge itself, asking what could be known beyond doubt. The dream, in his hands, became a tool of philosophy rather than a message from above. It revealed how easily the mind could be deceived by its own vivid productions. Other thinkers of the era, including Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, also tended to treat dreams as the noise of a resting mind, scattered impressions stitched together without much reliable meaning. The dream was no longer a doorway to gods or ancestors. For many, it was an interesting puzzle, but not a place to seek wisdom. Yet, just as one current was cooling toward dreams, another was warming. The Romantic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries embraced the imagination as a deep and serious power. Poets, novelists, and artists turned again toward the night, hoping to find in it a kind of creative spring that pure reason could not supply. The English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge claimed that his haunting poem about Kubla Khan came to him in a state of reverie, possibly induced by an opiate, and that the verses arrived almost fully formed. Famously, he was interrupted, he said, by a visitor from the village of Porlock, and the rest of the dream slipped away. The poem we have is, by his account, only a fragment of what the night had offered. Mary Shelley, traveling with friends near Lake Geneva in the summer of 1816, later recalled that the seed of her novel Frankenstein arrived in a kind of waking dream, a vivid inner image of a pale figure stirring into life beside its maker. Even within the sciences, certain remarkable stories took hold. The chemist Auguste Kekule wrote that the ring shape of the benzene molecule occurred to him after a dream of a snake seizing its own tail. Dmitri Mendeleev, who organized the periodic table of the elements, later told friends that the arrangement had come to him during sleep. Whether one trusts every detail of these accounts, the message of the age is clear. The dream had returned to the imagination of educated people, no longer simply divine, but still strangely generous. Reason had grown careful about it, and yet the night refused to leave the human mind alone, slipping back into poems, novels, and even the quiet notebooks of scientists. As the 19th century turned into the 20th, the study of dreams entered a new chapter, this time within a developing field called psychology. Among its early figures was a Viennese neurologist named Sigmund Freud, who would change the way Western culture spoke about dreams for generations to come. In 1899, Freud published a long and ambitious book called The Interpretation of Dreams. He believed that the mind held layers far below the surface of awareness, and that dreams offered, as he memorably put it, a kind of royal road into those hidden depths. To Freud, a dream was rarely a simple replay of the day. It was something quietly disguised, a story whose surface concealed deeper currents. He proposed a careful distinction between two aspects of any dream. The first he called the manifest content, meaning the events and images the dreamer actually remembers on waking. The second he called the latent content, meaning the underlying wishes, fears, and tensions that, in his view, gave rise to the dream in the first place. Between the two, he believed, sat a process he called the dream work, which transformed the latent material through condensation, displacement, and symbolic substitution. A worry might appear as a strange building. A wish might appear as a small detail in the corner of the scene. Freud also argued that many dreams were, at their core, expressions of wish. Even unsettling dreams, he suggested, often hid an attempt by the mind to give shape to something it longed for, feared, or could not say openly during the day. This idea was provocative and, to many, shocking. It treated the mind as far more layered than older thinkers had imagined, and it suggested that the inner life carried on a quiet conversation with itself even while the body slept. The cultural effect of Freud's work was enormous. Words like unconscious, repression, and dream symbol entered everyday speech across many languages. Artists, writers, and filmmakers absorbed his ideas. For decades, much of the educated world spoke of dreams in his vocabulary, even when they did not realize it. Yet the specific scientific claims of his theory have not aged easily. Later researchers have struggled to confirm his particular method of interpretation, and many of his confident readings now seem more imaginative than tested. Modern sleep science holds his work at a respectful distance, valuing his attention to inner life while questioning many of his conclusions. Still, Freud reopened a door that had been closing. He insisted that the dream mattered, that it was worth listening to, and that something in the human mind was speaking quietly to itself in the night. Whether or not one accepts his particular interpretations, that simple insistence has continued to shape how dreams are approached in clinics, in books, and in late conversations between curious friends. For a time, the young Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung was one of Freud's closest companions in this new science of the mind. The two corresponded extensively, traveled together, and for several years seemed bound by a shared mission: But Jung gradually came to feel that Freud's view of dreams, while powerful, was too narrow. Around 1912, he began to publish ideas that would lead, painfully, to a parting of ways. Jung agreed that dreams were not random. He agreed that they reached toward something deeper than waking awareness. But he disagreed with the idea that dreams were largely disguises for hidden wishes. To Jung, a dream was less like a cipher to be cracked and more like a quiet letter from a part of the self that the daytime mind did not always know well. Its purpose was not always to conceal. Sometimes, he believed, a dream was simply trying to say something the dreamer had not yet learned how to hear. Jung introduced ideas that have since become widely known, even outside psychology. He spoke of archetypes, recurring inner figures and patterns that he believed showed up across cultures and across centuries. The wise elder, the shadow self, the inner companion, the threshold guide. He noticed that dream images of his patients seemed to echo images from myths, fairy tales, and religious traditions far removed from anything they had personally studied. To him, this hinted at a deeper layer of the mind, which he called the collective unconscious. It was, in his view, a shared inheritance of imagery and pattern that all humans carried with them, beneath the personal layer formed by an individual life. This was a poetic and ambitious idea. It connected dreaming to the great storytelling traditions of the world. It suggested that when one dreamed of crossing a dark river or meeting a stranger at a crossroads, one was not entirely alone in the symbol. Many other dreamers had stood at similar inner places. Modern science has been cautious with Jung's framework, much as it has been cautious with Freud's. The collective unconscious, in its strict form, is difficult to test, and contemporary cognitive research takes a different approach to dream symbolism. Yet, Jung's emphasis on the meaningful texture of dreams and on the dreamer's own role in making sense of inner images has remained influential in literature, in art therapy, and in many quiet rooms where people work with their own night memories. Whether one follows him fully or not, Jung helped keep alive the idea that the dream was not only a problem to be solved, it could also be a quiet companion to the inner life, a soft form of self-encounter, and a doorway into the long imaginative inheritance of the human family. By the time Jung's later writings appeared, the tools of science were already shifting. Soon, dreams would be approached not only through conversation, but through the gentle hum of instruments measuring the body in sleep. In 1953, in a small sleep laboratory at the University of Chicago, something quietly extraordinary happened. A graduate student named Eugene Aserinsky, working under the older physiologist Nathaniel Kleitman, had been observing sleeping subjects through the night. Among his tasks was to track the slow movements of the eyes beneath closed lids, which had long been thought to drift gently downward as sleep deepened. Aserinsky had a young son, Armand, and during early experiments, he sometimes used him as a subject, watching long hours of paper recordings unspooled from a polygraph machine. The pen traced the soft electrical patterns of the brain, the muscles, and the eyes, giving a kind of written portrait of the night. What Aserinsky noticed was unexpected. Every so often, the eyes of his sleeping subjects did not drift quietly. They jerked rapidly back and forth, almost as though the sleeper were watching something. The brain wave patterns at those moments looked surprisingly active, in some ways closer to waking than to deep sleep. Yet the body lay still, the muscles deeply relaxed. At first, Aserinsky and Kleitman thought their equipment might be misbehaving. They checked it carefully. The signals were real. They began to wake their subjects during these strange episodes and ask what had been happening. Again and again, the answer was the same. The sleeper had been dreaming, often vividly. In the early 1950s, Aserinsky and Kleitman published a short paper in the journal Science. It was modestly titled and quietly worded, but it changed the field forever. They had identified a recurring stage of sleep marked by quick eye movement, low muscle tone, and active brain patterns. Dreaming, it seemed, was not scattered randomly through the night. It was concentrated in significant part within these particular passages of sleep. Soon afterward, another graduate student in the same laboratory, William Dement, took the work further. He spent years studying sleep stages, sometimes living for days alongside his subjects in the lab, and helped map the broader cycle of a night's rest. Dement would later become one of the great public voices of sleep science, founding sleep clinics and helping to establish sleep medicine as a serious field. What had begun as a careful observation of a child's twitching eyelids had opened a new continent of inquiry. For the first time in human history, the dreaming brain could be reliably found, timed, and studied while it was at work. Across the decades that followed, laboratories around the world would refine this work and add new instruments to it. The night was no longer a closed door. It had a structure, a rhythm, and a hidden architecture that could, very gently, be measured by patient observers. Once researchers could see sleep, they began to map its shape. What they found was not a single uniform state, but a quiet sequence of stages that the body and brain pass through, gently, again and again, across the night. A typical adult night begins with a soft drift downward. The first stage of sleep is light and easily disturbed. Muscles loosen, the heart slows, and the brain produces patterns that begin to look different from the alert daytime mind. From there, the sleeper moves into a slightly deeper stage, marked by short bursts of brain activity that researchers came to call sleep spindles, along with other quiet electrical signatures. These have been associated in many studies with the work of laying down memories and protecting sleep from being interrupted. After this, the body sinks into the deepest stage of slow wave sleep. Here, the brain produces large, unhurried waves, and the body becomes still and heavy. This is the stage from which it is hardest to be awakened. Children especially can spend long stretches in this deep territory, which is part of why they sometimes seem almost impossible to rouse in the early part of a night. Slow wave sleep is widely thought to be a time of physical restoration, immune support, and a particular kind of memory work. After a period of deep sleep, the body does not simply rise straight back to waking. Instead, it climbs part way up and enters the active dreaming stage, the one Aserinsky and Kleitman had first identified, marked by quick eye movement and rich brain activity. Most of the body's larger muscles are quietly held still during this time, a kind of natural protection that prevents us from acting out the contents of our dreams. Heart rate and breathing become irregular, almost as though the body were responding to something unseen. And for many sleepers, this is where the most vivid narrative dreams unfold. These stages do not occur only once. Over the course of a typical night, the sleeper cycles through this pattern several times, with each full cycle lasting roughly 90 minutes. Early in the night, slow-wave sleep is more abundant. Later in the night, the dreaming stages grow longer and richer. By the hours before dawn, much of one's dreaming life has actually been lived. This shape of the night was almost entirely invisible to earlier generations. The ancient world could only watch a sleeper from the outside, noting the slow breath and the closed eyes. The inner sequence remained a mystery. Now we know that sleep is not a single dark room. It is a series of soft chambers, each with its own quality, gently passed through. And dreams, we have come to see, have their preferred chambers, returning to them again and again, as faithfully as a tide returning to a familiar shore. For most of human history, no one could see what was happening inside the head of a sleeping person. The dream was, in every literal sense, a private event. But over the second half of the 20th century, and especially in recent decades, gentler imaging tools allowed researchers to peer at the dreaming brain in a new way. What they have found is a strange and beautiful pattern. During the active dreaming stage of sleep, the brain is not at rest. Many regions are vividly engaged, almost as engaged as during waking life. But which regions and which fall quiet helps explain why dreams feel the way they do. The visual areas of the brain are highly active during dreaming, even though the eyes are closed and there is no light to gather. This may be part of why dreams are so often experienced as vivid, almost cinematic images. The mind is generating a world from within, using the same equipment it uses to perceive a world from without. Areas associated with emotion, especially the limbic regions deep within the brain, are also unusually active. This may help explain why dreams so often carry a strong emotional charge, sometimes more intense than the events of an ordinary waking day. Fear, longing, joy, embarrassment, tenderness, all can sweep through a dream with surprising force. At the same time, certain regions of the front part of the brain, particularly parts of the prefrontal cortex, become noticeably quieter than during waking. These are areas associated with logical reasoning, self-monitoring, planning, and the steady evaluation of whether something makes sense. When this area dims, the mind grows wonderfully tolerant of strangeness. A familiar street can lead to an unknown city. A loved one can become a stranger and then a friend again. Time can fold. Settings can shift without protest. The dreamer rarely thinks to ask whether any of this is reasonable, because the part of the mind that usually asks such questions is, for the moment, drifting in its own quiet. The body, meanwhile, remains gently held in place. Most large muscles are kept still by signals descending from the brainstem, a state sometimes called sleep paralysis when noticed at the edges of dreaming. This soft restraint is a kind of protection, allowing the inner story to unfold without spilling into the bedroom. So a dreaming brain is, in a sense, an active brain with the inner critic temporarily off duty, the senses turned inward, the emotions stirring, and the body lying quietly behind the curtain. From this very particular arrangement, the dream emerges, vivid and strange. It is not difficult to see why earlier ages felt the dream came from somewhere else, from gods or messengers or hidden ancestors. The experience itself is so different from ordinary thought that it seems to belong to another country. We now know that the country is, in some sense, the same one we live in, only differently lit. If we ask what dreams might be for, one of the most carefully studied possibilities concerns memory. Across the night, while the body lies still, the brain appears to do a kind of quiet sorting. It is not the loud filing of a busy office. It is something gentler, more like a lamplit librarian moving slowly through the day's accumulated pages, deciding what to keep, what to set aside, and what to thread together with older volumes. Memory researchers have long noticed that what we learn during a day is more durable if we sleep before being tested. A new vocabulary list, a piece of music, a tricky route across an unfamiliar city, all tend to settle more firmly after a good night's rest. This is true not only for the kind of memory we can describe in words, but also for the quieter memory of skills, of how the hand knows where to fall on a keyboard or a string. In recent decades, researchers have come to believe that different stages of sleep may serve different aspects of this work. Slow-wave sleep, with its deep, unhurried rhythms, has been linked to the consolidation of factual memory and the strengthening of recently learned material. The active dreaming stage, with its vivid imagery and emotional weight, has been associated with the integration of memories into wider patterns and with the gentle processing of feeling. Studies in animals have shown remarkable things. After a rat has spent the day learning to navigate a maze, certain cells in its brain replay parts of that journey while it sleeps in patterns that closely mirror the original experience, though often faster. It is as though the brain were quietly walking back through the corridors of the day, marking what was important, smoothing what was rough. Whether human dreams are exactly such replays is more difficult to say. Our dreams rarely repeat the day in literal form. They borrow fragments, blend them with older memories, and weave them with concerns and wishes. But many researchers now suspect that this very weaving is part of how memory is made stable. The dream may not be a recording of the day. It may be a workshop in which the day is being fitted into a longer life. If this view is right, then a great deal of what we treasure as personal memory has been quietly shaped in sleep. The names of friends, the lessons of mistakes, the contours of places we've loved may all be set more deeply in us by nights we will never remember in detail. The dream becomes in part a hidden craftsman working in the dark to keep us recognizably ourselves. It is a softer picture than the older idea of dreams as raw nonsense or as coded messages. In this view, the dream is part of the long, patient labor of becoming a continuous person. Each night, the day is folded gently into the larger story of a life. If memory is one possible purpose of dreams, another concerns the careful management of feeling. For decades, researchers have noticed that dreams rarely concern themselves with the calm middle of life. They tend to gather around what is unsettled, fears, hopes, embarrassments, longings, conflicts, all seem to find their way into the night more readily than the small ordinary moments that fill most of a day. In the early years of this century, the Finnish researcher Antti Revonsuo proposed an idea sometimes called the threat simulation theory. He suggested that dreams might have served across long stretches of human evolution as a kind of inner rehearsal hall. In sleep, the mind could practice responding to dangers, threats, and difficult social situations without any of the real-world consequences. A person could feel chased and find themselves running. A person could face a sudden loss and feel its weight. The body remained safe, the muscles still, while the inner self moved through scenarios that might one day matter. Revonsuo pointed out that across cultures and ages, dreams of being pursued, of falling, of arriving unprepared, of facing strangers in unfamiliar places are remarkably common. If this is so, then nightmares, far from being only failures of rest, may sometimes be the system doing what it was shaped to do. They are not pleasant, but they may be part of how the mind keeps itself ready. Other researchers have suggested a broader idea, sometimes called the emotional regulation view. In this view, the dreaming brain does not only rehearse threats, it also processes the emotional residue of waking life. A difficult conversation, a small humiliation, a tender goodbye, all may be revisited, reshaped, and softened during the night. Studies have suggested that after a good night that includes the active dreaming stage, the emotional intensity of difficult memories can become a little easier to carry, while the memory of the event itself remains intact. This idea fits with something many people have noticed in their own lives. Sleeping on a problem often makes it feel different in the morning. Not necessarily solved, but somehow slightly more bearable, as though the night had taken a little of the sharpness off it. Of course, none of this is fully settled. Researchers continue to debate which of these functions, if any, is the primary one. It is also possible that dreams do several things at once, the way a long walk can clear the head, exercise the body, and allow time to think, all in a single, quiet hour. What does seem clear is that dreams are not simply waste. They are not the cluttered shavings of a working mind. They appear to be doing something, even if we are not yet sure exactly what. And they have been doing it faithfully for as long as our species can remember. Not every theory of dreams looks for hidden meaning. In 1977, two Harvard researchers, Alan Hobson and Robert McCarley, offered a quieter and more mechanical account that startled many in the field. They called their idea the activation synthesis hypothesis, and it grew out of careful observation of the dreaming brain. Hobson and McCarley pointed out that during the active dreaming stage of sleep, certain regions deep in the brainstem fire in irregular bursts. These signals do not arrive in any particular order, and they do not, on their own, mean anything. They are simply pulses of neural activity rising from below. When these pulses reach the upper regions of the brain, however, something interesting happens. The cortex, the great folded sheet of tissue most associated with thought and perception, does what it always does. It tries to make sense of what it receives. During waking life, that sense-making is constrained by the steady arrival of information from the eyes, ears, and skin. The cortex weaves this stream into a coherent picture of the world. But during dreaming, those outer signals are largely shut out. Only the inner pulses remain, and the cortex, faithful to its nature, continues to weave. In this view, the strange landscapes of dreams are not coded messages. They are the cortex's best effort to construct a story out of what is essentially internal noise. A burst of activity in the regions that govern balance might become a sensation of falling. A burst near the regions associated with faces might summon a familiar visitor. A wave through the emotional centers might color the whole scene with dread or warmth. The dream, in this account, is a meaning-making process running on randomness. This was a striking and somewhat humbling idea. It suggested that the rich interpretive traditions of Freud, Jung, and many others might have been reading deep meaning into what was, at bottom, the brain's improvisation. For some, this was a relief. For others, it felt like a loss. Hobson himself later softened parts of his early framework. He came to acknowledge that even if dreams begin in noise, the way the brain shapes that noise is deeply revealing of who the dreamer is. The same pulses in two different lives would not produce the same dream. The cortex always weaves with the threads it already has. So, even within this more mechanical view, there is room for the personal. The dream may not arrive carrying a hidden message, but it still bears the fingerprint of the dreamer. In the choice of images, the texture of feeling, and the shape of the inner story, something quietly individual still appears. The activation synthesis idea remains influential, though few researchers now hold it in its strictest form. It joined a wider conversation in which dreams are studied not from any one angle, but from many, as a meeting place of biology, memory, and the imaginative life of the dreamer. There is one particular kind of dream that has fascinated thinkers for centuries, in part because it sits so strangely between sleep and waking. It is the dream in which the dreamer becomes aware that they are dreaming, while still inside the dream itself. In modern terms, this is often called lucid dreaming. The experience can take many forms. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a small detail that does not match the world, a clock face that will not stay still, a familiar room with an extra door, a conversation with someone long absent. Something flickers in the dreamer's awareness, and instead of the ordinary acceptance of the dream, a soft recognition arrives. This is a dream. The dreamer is dreaming. What follows varies from person to person. Some lucid dreamers describe a calm sense of presence, simply observing the dream from within while remaining aware of its nature. Others find that they can shape the dream itself, walking through walls, flying gently above familiar landscapes, or speaking with the figures who appear to them. The body, all the while, remains still in bed. As we touched on earlier, contemplative traditions in Tibetan Buddhism developed careful practices around this state long before any laboratory considered it. For centuries, dream yoga taught practitioners to recognize the dream as a dream, partly as a path toward understanding the nature of mind itself. In the late 20th century, the American psychophysiologist Stephen LaBerge, working at Stanford University, helped bring lucid dreaming into mainstream science. He developed clever experimental designs in which trained lucid dreamers were asked to give prearranged eye movement signals from within their dreams. Because the muscles of the eyes are not paralyzed during the active dreaming stage, those small movements could be detected on recording instruments while the rest of the body remained still. When the agreed signals appeared at the agreed moments, science had, in a sense, received a message from inside a dream. This research gradually helped establish lucid dreaming as a real and studyable phenomenon, not merely a literary curiosity. It also raised intriguing questions. What does it mean for awareness to flicker on inside an inner story? What does it tell us about the layers of consciousness that the mind can hold a small lamp of self-recognition even while dreaming? For most people, lucid dreams happen rarely, if at all. They are not necessary for restful sleep, nor are they a goal worth straining for, but they remind us that the dreaming mind is more layered than it first appears, and that even within the night, a quiet awareness can sometimes turn and look at itself, almost like a candle that briefly notices its own soft flame. If you have ever lived with a dog or a cat, you have probably seen something curious. A sleeping animal, deep into rest, begins to twitch. Paws move as if running, ears flicker, whiskers tremble. Sometimes there is a soft sound, a muffled bark, or a quiet chirp. The body is otherwise still, but something is clearly happening within. For a long time, people noticed these signs and quietly wondered if animals dreamed. The question seemed almost impossible to answer. Animals could not describe their inner experience, and dreams had long been thought of as a deeply human gift. But when researchers began studying sleep across species, they found something remarkable. Many animals show during their rest the very same patterns that mark the active dreaming stage in humans. Mammals, in particular, share this stage almost universally. Dogs, cats, horses, mice, dolphins, elephants, monkeys, and many others all enter periods of sleep marked by quick eye movement, irregular breathing, and active brain patterns. Birds, too, show similar episodes, though shorter and arranged differently across the night. Even some reptiles, in studies of recent years, appear to have a primitive version of these states. The roots of dreaming sleep may stretch deep into the long history of life. Direct evidence that animals experience something like a dream came from a striking experiment by the French researcher Michel Jouvet in the 1960s. Jouvet found that a small region in the brainstem helps keep the body still during the active dreaming stage. When this region was carefully altered in cats, the animals continued to enter dreaming sleep, but their bodies were no longer held quiet. They began to act out what seemed to be hunts and explorations, stalking, pouncing, and crouching, all while their eyes remained closed and the rest of the world was absent. It was, in its quiet way, a glimpse of an inner life. Later research has only deepened the impression. Rats appear to replay maze experiences during sleep. Songbirds appear to rehearse their songs while resting. The dreaming, whatever it is not unique to us. This is a tender thought to carry into the night. Somewhere, a dog is twitching beside its owner's bed, perhaps chasing a ball through a field that exists only inside its head. Somewhere, a cat is purring softly through a dream of her own. A horse, asleep in a quiet barn, may be running through grass that only it can see. The night belongs not only to humans, but to a great quiet community of dreamers. We share the dark with them, and likely have for as long as our family of creatures has known sleep at all. There is a kind of comfort in that companionship. The act of dreaming, whatever it is not a strange, isolated quirk of one species. It is something older, gentler, and more widely shared. We dream among the dreaming. Not all of the dream country is gentle. Tonight, we look briefly at some of its more difficult landscapes. With care and without lingering, nightmares are the most familiar of these. They are dreams that carry strong fear, threat, or distress, often vivid enough to wake the sleeper. Most people experience them now and then, especially in childhood, and an occasional nightmare is generally considered a normal part of life. Researchers have suggested that nightmares may sometimes serve the same emotional and rehearsal functions as ordinary dreams, only with the volume turned higher. They become a concern mainly when they grow frequent or distressing enough to disturb sleep over time. Recurring dreams are another curious feature of inner life. Many people return year after year to the same dream landscape, a particular house, a particular school corridor, a particular sense of being unprepared for something. These recurring dreams often arrive during periods of stress and tend to fade when life settles. Some dream researchers think they may reflect concerns the mind has not yet fully resolved, returning gently until they are. Then there is the experience sometimes called sleep paralysis. As we have mentioned, the body is normally held still during the active dreaming stage. Most of the time this happens entirely outside our awareness, but occasionally, especially when sleep is irregular, a person may briefly become aware while the body's stillness has not yet lifted. They feel awake, but cannot move. Sometimes the experience is accompanied by vivid, dreamlike imagery in the room. Cultures across the world have stories about these visitations, often interpreted as visits from spirits or unseen beings. We now understand them as a small misalignment between two systems that usually keep careful time with one another. Night terrors are different from ordinary nightmares. They tend to occur during deep, slow-wave sleep rather than during the active dreaming stage, often early in the night. The person, frequently a child, may sit up, cry out, or appear distressed while remaining largely unaware of their surroundings and remembering little or nothing in the morning. They are unsettling for those who witness them, but generally not harmful, and most children outgrow them. These darker corners of the dream country are real and worth knowing about, especially for those they touch. But they are a small portion of the wider landscape. Most nights are quieter, gentler, and more ordinary than the dramatic exceptions might suggest. The mind, even in its strangeness, mostly tends toward rest. For people who do struggle with frequent or troubling dreams, modern care offers thoughtful approaches. Sleep specialists, therapists, and quiet practices of evening calm have all been shown to help. The night is not a fixed sentence. It can often be gently improved. So here we are, at the soft edge of the night, with a long story behind us and the quiet, dark ahead. We began in the clay tablets of Mesopotamia, where dreamers first wrote down their nights. We passed through Egyptian temples and Greek sanctuaries, where the sleeping mind was thought to whisper with gods. We sat for a moment with Aristotle, who first imagined that the dream might come not from above, but from within. We followed dreams into scripture, into Islamic scholarship, into Tibetan monasteries, into Aboriginal dream time, and into a Taoist garden, where a man wondered if he might be a butterfly. We watched reason grow careful, and the romantic imagination grow tender around the same vivid material. We met Freud and Jung, who in different ways insisted that the night was speaking to itself, and we entered the laboratory, where careful researchers learned to find the dreaming brain, time it, and study it gently. We learned that the night is not a single dark room, but a series of soft chambers, that the brain is wide awake during much of its dreaming, that memories may be quietly woven into the long story of a life while we sleep, that emotions may be softened by morning, that even animals enter their own inner worlds. We touched briefly on lucid dreams, on nightmares, on the strange lull of sleep paralysis, and throughout all of it, we held the same gentle truth. The dream remains, in part, a mystery. That mystery has not been a failure of inquiry. It has been one of its quiet gifts. Each careful answer has revealed new and softer questions. Each instrument has shown us the shape of something that still at its center eludes simple description. We are not entirely sure why we dream. We know that we do, that we always have, and that the practice is far older and wider than our species alone. Tonight, you will likely dream again. You will likely not remember most of it. You may carry into morning only a faint impression, a single image, a softened mood. That is the way the dream usually arrives, like weather we have walked through and almost forgotten. There is no need to chase it. There is no need to capture it in words. It will do its quiet work whether or not we attend to it, and we will wake gently into another day. Outside, the world continues its quiet turning. Somewhere, a child is settling into a first dream of the night. Somewhere, a dog is twitching on a worn rug. Somewhere, a stranger in a city you will never see is closing their eyes upon a day you will never know. And somewhere far away, perhaps, a researcher is still watching a soft pen trace the rhythms of a sleeping brain, asking the same patient question that ancient temple priests once asked in their own way. What is happening in the night? You are part of all of it. The unbroken thread of dreamers continues through you gently into this night. The world slows, and so do we. Good night.